I used to think addiction was something that happened to other people with fewer chances, fewer excuses, fewer outs, for a long time. That belief was the thin wall that kept me from admitting what was happening to me. I had a job. I had friends. I had a life that looked functional from the outside. But every night ended the same way, chasing numbness, bargaining with myself, promising tomorrow would be different. It never was. Addiction doesn't arrive all at once. It settles in quietly, like dust you stop noticing until it's coating everything. At first, it was relief, then routine, then necessity. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking what I wanted from life and started organizing everything around not feeling what I felt when I was sober. Shame became my background noise. Fear became my calendar. The moment things changed wasn't dramatic in the way movies make it. No police lights, no hospital bed, just a night alone in my apartment, sitting on the floor with my back against the couch, realizing I had spent an entire week outside of work without a single clear memory. I remember staring at my hands and thinking, with unsettling clarity, if I keep going like this, I will disappear without ever leaving. That thought scared me more than withdrawal ever would. The decision to change wasn't brave. It was exhausted. I didn't suddenly believe in myself. I just knew I couldn't survive another year of living the same day on repeat. I didn't know what recovery looked like, and I didn't trust myself to succeed. What I did know was this: staying was killing me. That night, I made a deal with myself, not a promise to be perfect, not a vow to never fail again. Just a decision to move, to disrupt the patterns that fed my addiction, to step far enough away from my old life that I could hear my own thoughts again. Travel wasn't part of the plan yet. Freedom wasn't a concept I understood. All I had was a fragile willingness to try something different and the uncomfortable awareness that change would hurt before it healed. If you're reading this and recognizing yourself in any of it, know this: the beginning doesn't feel hopeful. It feels like standing in the dark, admitting you're lost. But that admission is not the end. It's the first honest step forward. The first thing I learned about recovery is that the body screams before it listens. I went into it thinking the hard part would be the cravings, the shaking hands, the headaches, the sleepless nights. Those were real, and they were brutal, but they weren't what nearly broke me. What almost sent me back was the silence. When the substances were gone, everything they'd been muting came rushing in. Regret, grief, anger, and a kind of sadness, so heavy it felt physical. I had built my entire coping system around escape. Take that away, and you're left with yourself, unfiltered. The early days followed a rigid routine because chaos was dangerous. Wake up, drink water even when I didn't want to, eat something simple, walk, even when my legs felt like concrete. I avoided old places and old numbers in my phone like they were live wires. I learned quickly that willpower alone is unreliable when your brain is negotiating against your survival. I asked for help, and that was humbling in ways I wasn't prepared for. Saying I'm not okay out loud stripped me of every illusion of control I had left. Support groups felt awkward at first. I didn't feel like I belonged there. Everyone else seemed either further along or more broken than me, and my mind tried to use that as an excuse to leave. But I stayed, mostly because leaving felt riskier. Progress wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong and clear-headed, almost proud. Other days I couldn't trust my own thoughts. The voice of addiction is subtle. It doesn't shout. It whispers reasonable-sounding lies. You weren't that bad. You've earned a reward. You can handle it now. Learning to recognize that voice as an intruder, not a truth, took time. There were nights I lay awake bargaining with myself, measuring hours instead of miles, victories counted in minutes of resistance. And yet, somewhere in that grind, something shifted. I started noticing small things again. The way morning light hit the kitchen counter, the satisfaction of a full breath that didn't hurt. Recovery didn't make me feel good right away. It made me feel real. And as uncomfortable as that was, it was also the first sign that I was still here, and that maybe, just maybe, I had something left to build. Once the fog of early recovery lifted enough for me to think beyond the next hour. A question kept surfacing: if I stay here, who do I become? My environment was saturated with reminders of who I had been. The same streets where I'd walk to buy what I swore would be the last time. The same bars, the same routines, the same unspoken expectations. Even the furniture felt complicit. Nothing was technically forcing me back, but everything was quietly inviting me to repeat myself. At first, the idea of travel sounded irresponsible. I was still fragile. I didn't trust my impulses, and running away had been one of my specialties. I told myself I needed stability, not movement. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized something important. Staying wasn't neutral for me. Staying was active exposure to triggers I hadn't learned to handle yet. The thought of leaving didn't come with a detailed plan. It arrived as a feeling, a pull toward distance. Not to escape responsibility, but to create space. Space to practice being someone new without constantly bumping into the ruins of someone old. I started small. I read stories from people who'd rebuilt their lives in unfamiliar places. I watched travel videos late at night, imagining what it would be like to wake up somewhere no one knew my past. Somewhere my mistakes didn't have names. The idea felt both terrifying and clean. There was guilt, too. A voice in my head insisted that, if I were truly committed to recovery, I'd prove it by staying put and facing things. But recovery isn't about punishment. It's about survival and growth. And for me, growth required movement. The decision didn't feel triumphant. It felt careful. I set rules for myself. No traveling to party destinations, no celebration mindset, no pretending I was cured. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a controlled experiment in living differently. The day I bought the ticket, my hand shook, not from cravings this time, but from possibility. I wasn't running toward happiness. I was running toward unknown, and for the first time in years, that felt healthier than staying exactly where I was. My first destination wasn't glamorous. No bucket list landmarks, no dramatic reinvention story. I chose it because it was quiet, affordable, and far enough away that I couldn't impulsively turn back. In hindsight, that simplicity saved me. The first few days were disorienting. My body was there, but my mind was still living in old rhythms, checking the time out of habit, bracing for urges that never fully arrived. Without my usual cues, cravings came differently. Less sharp, more confused, like they didn't know where to land. I walked a lot. Streets I couldn't name. Neighborhoods with languages I barely understood. There was comfort in anonymity. No one knew what I had been addicted to. No one was watching for my patterns. I was just another stranger buying groceries, asking for directions, sitting alone with a coffee. That normalcy was healing in a way therapy hadn't prepared me for. Nature played its part too. Mornings were filled with unfamiliar sounds, birds I couldn't identify, church bells that marked time differently than my old alarms. I started waking up early without resentment. My nervous system, always on high alert before, slowly recalibrated. There were still hard moments. Evenings were the most dangerous. When the day quieted down, my thoughts got louder. I learned to meet that discomfort instead of medicating it. I wrote, I stretched. I reminded myself that boredom wasn't an emergency. One afternoon, sitting on a park bench watching families pass by, it hit me. I hadn't thought about using in several hours. That felt like a miracle I didn't want to question too closely. I just sat there and let it be true. This place didn't fix me. It gave me room. And sometimes, room is all you need to start breathing again. Travel introduces you to people in a way everyday life rarely does. Conversation skips small talk and jumps straight into stories because no one expects permanence. That intimacy, brief and unpolished, became one of my greatest teachers. I met a man at a hostel kitchen who had rebuilt his life after prison. He spoke calmly about years he couldn't get back, not with bitterness, but with responsibility. You don't undo the past, he said while chopping vegetables. You outgrow it. That sentence stayed with me longer than most advice I'd been given. There was a woman I shared a train ride with who traveled after losing her partner. She told me grief had taught her that staying still hurt more than moving forward slowly. She didn't know my history, but somehow she spoke directly to it. We parted ways without exchanging contacts, and yet she influenced my trajectory. Even the quiet interactions mattered. A shop owner who greeted me every morning until my order became familiar. A street musician whose routine reminded me that discipline could be creative, not restrictive. These people never asked for my backstory, but they showed me versions of resilience I could borrow from. What surprised me most was how honest I became with strangers. With no reputation to protect, I could say, I'm starting over, without explanation. No one flinched. No one demanded proof. They simply accepted it as a valid reason to be. Where I was. In those fleeting connections, I started seeing myself differently. Not as a man defined by what he'd escaped, but as someone actively choosing what to build next. Each encounter was a small mirror, reflecting not my worst moments, but my capacity to keep going. Recovery can feel isolating. Travel reminded me that everyone is carrying something, and that survival, in its many forms, is a language understood everywhere. As the weeks passed, something subtle but profound changed. I wasn't just sober in a new place, I was present in it. For the first time in years, I experienced the world without buffering it through chemicals or constant mental escape. Color seemed sharper, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in a grounded, trustworthy way. I could trust what I was feeling. When something was beautiful, it was beautiful. When something was hard, it stayed hard without spiraling into catastrophe. Travel stripped my life down to essentials. A backpack, a budget, a loose plan. Without excess, I began noticing patterns in myself. How I reacted to uncertainty. How much control I actually needed. How often anxiety was just unused energy asking for direction. I realized how small my old world had been, not geographically, but mentally. Addiction had narrowed my focus to immediate relief. On the road, time expanded again. I thought in days and weeks, not just in cravings and consequences. I started asking different questions. What kind of mornings do I want? What kind of tired feels earned? Being exposed to different cultures also softened me. I saw ways of living that didn't revolve around productivity or consumption. Long meals, unhurried conversations, public spaces designed for lingering. It challenged the urgency I'd lived under for so long, the belief that if I wasn't constantly chasing something, I was failing. There were moments of loneliness, but they felt clean, honest. Loneliness without self-destruction is uncomfortable, but it's survivable. And surviving it taught me I was stronger than the version of myself who always needed an exit. Travel didn't give me answers. It taught me how to sit with questions without running. And that, more than any destination, marked the beginning of a new way of seeing my life. I used to believe that changing my environment would silence temptation completely. That was naive. Addiction is patient. It waits for moments of weakness, not locations. The first real test came on an unremarkable evening. I'd had a good day, almost too good. Productive, social, calm. That's when the old voice returned, casual and confident. You're doing great. You've proved your point. One night won't undo all of this. It wasn't a craving in the physical sense. It was nostalgia. A longing for the familiar comfort of letting go, of not having to stay alert inside my own mind. That scared me more than any early withdrawal symptom had. I didn't panic. Panic feeds impulse. Instead, I slowed everything down. I reminded myself that urges crest and fall whether you act on them or not. I went back to my room, drank water, and sat on the floor the way I had months earlier, except this time, I wasn't trapped. I was choosing. I started keeping a rule: never decide anything in the moment of temptation. Decisions could wait 20 minutes, an hour, a night. By the time the deadline passed, the urge usually had to. I also learned to talk back to the voice, not with aggression, but with clarity. This feeling is information, not instruction. Wanting something didn't mean I had to obey it. There were nights I walked aimlessly through unfamiliar streets just to burn off restlessness. Nights I went to bed absurdly early to avoid myself. None of it was glamorous, but it was effective. Each resisted urge left a residue of trust. I began to believe, slowly, that I could survive discomfort without self-destructing. Temptation didn't mean failure was inevitable. It meant I was human and learning how to stay. After a while, travel stopped feeling like an escape and started feeling like a way of life. The constant movement that once seemed destabilizing became grounding. Every arrival required intention. Every departure taught me how little I truly needed. I developed rituals that replaced my old habits. Morning walks instead of hangovers. Journaling instead of numbing. Planning routes, budgets, and days gave my mind structure without suffocation. Movement became my metronome, keeping me aligned. There was a quiet joy in the logistics of it all, figuring out transportation in a foreign language, navigating unfamiliar systems, adapting on the fly. Each small success reinforced a truth addiction had buried. I was capable. Living this way also sharpened my sense of responsibility. There was no one to rescue me if I spiraled. No familiar safety nets. That accountability didn't feel like pressure. It felt like ownership. My choices had visible consequences now, and that made them matter. I learned to enjoy my own company. Long bus rides, solo meals, days without conversation. Instead of filling the silence with substances, I filled it with observation and reflection. I noticed how my thoughts came and went, how emotions peaked and passed if I let them. Life on the move isn't always comfortable. Plans fall apart, money runs tight, loneliness visits, but there's honesty in it. No hiding, no autopilot, just a continuous practice of showing up as I am, where I am, for someone who once built his life around escape. Choosing a life that demanded presence felt like the ultimate reversal and the most sustainable form of freedom I'd ever known. Before recovery, I thought strength meant endurance, pushing through, taking more than you should, and not letting it show. Addiction thrives on that definition. It rewards silence and punishes honesty. Travel challenged that belief daily. Strength, I learned, often looked like asking for help in a language I barely spoke. Admitting confusion. Letting plans fall apart without interpreting it as personal failure. There were days when the strongest thing I did was rest instead of forcing productivity, or say no to opportunities that didn't align with where I was mentally. I stopped romanticizing suffering. Pain didn't make me better by default. Awareness did. I began checking in with myself the way I never had before. Am I tired or am I avoiding something? Am I lonely or just quiet? Those distinctions mattered. There was a moment that crystallized this shift. I missed a connection due to a misunderstanding and ended up stuck overnight in a small town. Old me would have spiraled, blamed myself, numbed the frustration, turned inconvenience into excuse. Instead, I found a cheap place to stay, ate something warm, and went to bed. No drama, no punishment, just problem solving. That night, it hit me. Resilience wasn't about toughness. It was about flexibility. About responding to life instead of bracing against it. The more I practiced this softer, steadier version of strength, the less I needed extremes to feel alive. I wasn't proving anything anymore. I was building something sustainable. And for the first time, strength felt like something that protected me, not something I had to survive. Not all temptations announced themselves loudly. Some arrived disguised as comfort, routine, or reward. By this point, sobriety felt more stable, which paradoxically made it more vulnerable. The urgency that once kept me vigilant had softened. I trusted myself more, and trust, when unexamined, can slip into complacency. There were moments when I missed the intensity of my old life. Not the consequences, but the sharp edges. Addiction had given everything a false sense of importance. Highs and lows, clear villains and easy escapes. On the road, life was calmer. And sometimes, calm felt unfamiliar enough to be unsettling. I noticed how easily I could replace one compulsion with another: overplanning, overworking, endlessly moving just to avoid stillness. None of it was chemically destructive, but the pattern was the same. Avoidance wearing a healthier mask. So I started slowing down on purpose, staying longer in places, letting days pass without a checklist, sitting with restlessness instead of outrunning it. The urge to escape didn't always want substances, it wanted distraction. I built in accountability, regular check-ins with people back home, honest journaling that didn't let me edit the uncomfortable parts. I reminded myself that recovery wasn't about never wanting it, was about responding consciously when I did. One evening, walking past a place that would have once pulled me in instantly, I felt a flicker of curiosity. Not desire, just memory. I acknowledged it, named it, and kept walking. No internal battle, no heroics. That was the real victory. The temptations didn't disappear. They just lost their authority. And learning that difference changed how I understood freedom, not as absence of struggle, but as the ability to choose my response. Everywhere I went, I collected pieces of other life stories that didn't belong to me, but somehow guided me anyway. In a small coastal town, I met a retired fisherman who had rebuilt his relationship with his children after decades of drinking. He spoke softly, almost apologetically, about lost time. Yet he smiled when he talked about mornings spent on the water now, teaching the youngest how to mend nets. There was no dramatic recovery story, just steady, quiet repair. That steadiness became a model I could imitate. On a train through the mountains, a young woman told me about her struggle with anxiety and how she found balance through long-distance running and painting. She didn't lecture or offer advice, she just shared the facts of her life. Hearing her speak honestly about imperfection and persistence reminded me that progress isn't a straight line. Even fleeting interactions mattered. A vendor in a bustling market who asked me how I was doing with genuine interest, and when I shared a small truth, nodded as if it made sense, made me realize how rare simple understanding is. It was the world acknowledging me without judgment, and that acknowledgement mattered deeply. I realized these stories weren't just inspiration, they were mirrors. They reflected what resilience, honesty, and self-forgiveness could look like in different forms. They reminded me I wasn't inventing a new life alone. I was learning from the countless ways humans navigate struggle. Those stories became part of my internal toolkit. Whenever doubt crept in, I could recall them. Not as comparisons, not as pressure, but as evidence that healing is possible in infinite ways. And that no one path is the only path. Travel changed more than my surroundings. It changed how I understood the world and my place in it. I began noticing nuances I had never seen before. Cultures that prioritized community over individual gain. People who celebrated small, ordinary moments instead of always chasing milestones. Societies where slowing down wasn't laziness, but a conscious choice. Witnessing these differences made me question the assumptions I'd carried for years, the ones addiction had amplified, that I was always behind. That efficiency defined worth, that discomfort was something to escape at any cost. I also started seeing my past differently. My addiction wasn't just shame. It was a distorted survival strategy. I could acknowledge the mistakes without letting them define my identity. Distance allowed perspective. Reflection became a daily habit, not a spiral of regret. I learned to value curiosity over judgment. Instead of labeling experiences as good or bad, I began asking, what can I learn? How does this expand my understanding? The world no longer felt like a series of obstacles or triggers. It became a classroom of lived experiences, each person and place offering insight. The most subtle shift was in how I saw myself. I no longer measured progress solely by what I avoided. I measured it by what I allowed myself to feel and explore. Fear, excitement, disappointment, joy, they all had space now. By letting the world teach me, I started teaching myself how to exist without crutches, without constant escape. That perspective didn't erase struggle, but it gave me context, purpose, and a quiet confidence I had never known. Recovery and travel both teach you that progress is often invisible until you notice it. I remember walking through a crowded street in a city I had no map for. My usual response would have been panic, or at least irritation. Instead, I paused, asked for directions, and navigated calmly. A small moment, but it felt monumental. I realized I was trusting myself again, trust I had lost years ago. Other victories were quieter. Turning down an invitation that might have led back into old patterns. Staying up late to finish a journal entry instead of scrolling mindlessly. Sleeping through an entire night without waking in anxiety. Each felt minor at the time, but in retrospect, they were the scaffolding of a new life. I started celebrating these small wins, not as trophies, but as proof that change was possible. That I could respond differently when life tested me. That my habits no longer defined me. Even setbacks became part of the process. One day, I gave in to a fleeting thought of escape, but instead of guilt consuming me, I noted it, processed it, and moved forward. Recovery wasn't a straight line, and travel taught me that detours didn't erase the journey, they enriched it. Over time, these small victories built a quiet resilience. The kind that doesn't need applause, because it has become self-sustaining. The kind that whispers, you can keep going, because you already have. It was in these incremental successes that I began to feel real freedom, not just the absence of substances, but the presence of choice, clarity, and trust in myself. Eventually, I stopped thinking of my life in terms of what I was running from, and started seeing it in terms of what I was moving toward. Freedom isn't a dramatic, cinematic moment. It's a collection of decisions, choosing a sunrise walk over a nap, saying yes to a conversation with a stranger, staying in a quiet town for a week instead of rushing to the next city. It's the clarity to notice how the air smells, how the sun feels on your skin, how laughter echoes differently in unfamiliar streets. I started feeling joy in ways I hadn't imagined possible. Simple things, sharing a meal with someone whose life was completely different from mine, dancing to street music with no one watching, watching waves crash at dusk while thinking about nothing at all. Each moment carried a richness that addiction had long muted. Traveling taught me that self-discovery isn't a solitary achievement, it's a layered process shaped by people, places, and experiences. My heart began opening in ways I thought had closed forever. Curiosity replaced anxiety. Adventure replaced compulsion. Presence replaced escape. I learned to trust life again, to embrace the unknown instead of fearing it. And through that trust, I felt something I had only dreamed of before, the quiet, unshakable joy of being alive in my own skin. Fully awake and fully free. The freedom I found wasn't about leaving my past behind. It was about carrying it with me, wiser and lighter, and choosing to live beyond it. If you're reading this and feeling stuck, lost, or trapped by habits you wish you could leave behind, I want you to know something simple but powerful. Change is possible. Even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Recovery is not linear. Travel is not a cure. But both taught me the same lesson. You don't need to be perfect to rebuild your life. You only need to take the next step. It could be small. It could be terrifying. It could just be admitting to yourself that you want something different. That admission is the spark. Everything else grows from there. I'm not writing this to inspire a storybook transformation. I'm writing this because honesty matters. The nights of fear, the moments of craving, the doubt, they're real. But so is the possibility of waking up in a place you've never been, seeing the world with fresh eyes, and realizing that you're capable of being present, resilient, and even joyful. I carry my past with me, yes, but it doesn't control me anymore. I've met people across the world whose lives are different but whose struggles mirror mine. I've walked streets I never thought I would, and each step reinforced a truth. Freedom isn't given. It's chosen, repeatedly, in moments big and small. If you're considering taking a new path, whether recovery, travel, or simply living more honestly, start where you are. Take the next step. One day, 1 mile, one choice at a time. You can build a life that surprises you. And when you do, you'll understand what I mean when I say, the world is wide. The possibilities are endless, and you are not defined by what you've left behind. You're defined by what you decide to carry forward and what you choose to create.